The world detonated under my boot. Not a glorious last stand, but a stupid miscalculation. One heartbeat I was checking the mine detector, the next I was flying, a rag doll flung by an angry god. Pain wasn't the first sensation. It was the silence. Eerie, absolute silence after the crackle of gunfire, the shouts of my squad. Then came the choking dust, the scent of scorched metal, and a scream that took a horrifying moment to register as my own. My leg was wrong. Twisted at an angle no human limb should bend. White-hot agony pulsed in time with the frantic pounding of my heart. Somewhere between the ragged gasps tearing from my throat, I thought, this is it. This is where I bleed out on this damned rock, another casualty in a pointless war. Fingers dug into my arm, hauling me. The world spun in nauseating flashes. Dirt, sky, dirt again. Panic spiked. The Accord monsters were closing in, ready to finish the job. I fumbled for my sidearm, but my hand closed on emptiness, disarmed while I was out. Fury lent me strength. If they wanted me dead, they'd have to choke the life out of me. I spat a curse, scrambling with my good leg, but the fingers tightened, relentless. A face loomed above, blurry but unmistakably alien. Too many eyes, chitinous skin gleaming in the harsh sunlight. "I'll kill you," I croaked, the words thick with blood. The creature, medic, probably, judging by the stained tunic, just grunted. It shifted its grip, and another wave of pain shot through me. Through the haze, I registered the bulk of its pack, not a weapon, but medical supplies. Rage turned to a flicker of bleak humor. Not a quick death then, but dragged back to their camp to be tortured, a propaganda trophy. I choked back a sob. Not that. Anything but that. The world tilted again. I was being dumped unceremoniously on a rough stretcher. Every jostle sent spikes of agony through me. Someone barked orders in their guttural language, and rough hands were prodding at my ruined leg. I thrashed, a cornered animal, but they outnumbered me. Then a sharp sting in my arm. Oblivion crashed down, a blessed curtain against the pain. "My oath demands I try," a voice whispered in the darkness. Harsh, accented, but unmistakably speaking English. A woman's voice, weary, and with a strange, chilling resolve. Then the blackness swallowed me whole. I surfaced to the sterile stink of disinfectant and pain. Not the white-hot agony of before, but a relentless throb that held me captive in my own battered body. My first instinct was to bolt, to fight, but my limbs refused to obey. Eyes slitting open, I confirmed the nightmare. I was in an enemy medbay. A crude cot, flickering monitors of alien design and harsh shadows in the corners. My leg was a monstrous lump of bandages, suspended from a makeshift sling. Alive! They should have slit my throat and been done with it. Fury sparked, a desperate flare against the tide of exhaustion. Better to die on my feet than rot in their clutches. I tried to sit up, and the world exploded in blinding flashes behind my eyes. Easy, easy. A touch on my shoulder, not cruel, but firm enough to force me back down. Then the crude box of a translator was shoved into my view. The display flickered, words forming in blocky, stilted English. Rest, injury serious. Rage overrode common sense. I snatched at the translator, ready to smash it. If they wanted something from me, they'd have to pry it out of my broken fingers. The touch on my shoulder tightened, became a grip I couldn't fight free of. I twisted my head, glaring up at. Not a monstrous soldier, but a young woman in a stained med tunic. Too many eyes blinked at me, face lined with weariness. One hand kept me pinned while the other retrieved the translator, setting it just out of my reach. "Questions. Later," the device rasped in its stilted voice. "Pain. Will return." It wasn't mockery. I heard bone-deep tiredness in the synthesized syllables, the translator barely keeping up with her labored breathing. Then, in a softer tone, something not yet programmed into the device. A plea, almost. "Please." Fury gave way to a different kind of fear. This wasn't some propaganda game. They were overworked, desperate. How many of their own were sprawled on these crude cots, hovering between life and death? And I, the enemy they'd patched up, was just another burden. The woman pressed something into my uninjured hand, a pain suppressant, probably. Then she was gone, swallowed by the bustle of the medbay. The translator sat on the cot, a silent accusation. I closed my eyes, then opened them again. The child. A flash of movement and fear earlier. There were things in the corners, bundles of rags too small to be wounded soldiers. This wasn't just a medbay. Survival instinct, cold and sharp, cut through the haze. Play dead, gather information, then escape. Or if there was no escape, die fighting after all. Dr. Shaani slumped against the supply cabinet, the weight of exhaustion threatening to buckle her knees. The oath echoed in her skull, a bitter mockery against the day's relentless tide of suffering. Treat all sentient beings. The Valari medical code, a beacon of idealism forged in a gentler age. Now, a battlefield decree she barely had the strength to uphold. Each dressing changed, each frantic surgery, it chipped away at a soul already worn thin. Her gaze fell upon the human. The young female soldier, glaring defiance even through the haze of pain suppressants. Shaani's hands clenched. How much easier this war would be if she could let that hate burn itself out. If she could turn her back on one more patient, one more enemy who, by all rights, deserved a slow, agonizing death. But the oath! She straightened, drawing upon the same stubborn grit that had carried her through countless sleepless nights. There was more than philosophy at stake. The accord was stretched to the breaking point. Every medic, every salvaged scrap of tech, was the difference between holding their fragile border outposts or being overrun. She could afford no more moral victories that led to strategic losses. A flicker of movement within the human's makeshift cubicle made Shaani focus. Reports mentioned agitation, resistance to treatment. Perhaps fear was waning, giving way to the desperation of someone who realizes escape is impossible. Perhaps that raw instinct could be bent, shaped to serve a different purpose. Forcing a semblance of briskness into her weary steps, Shaani approached. The bulky translator lay upon the human's cot, unused. A flicker of disappointment warred with a more pragmatic hope. This one was a soldier, trained to withstand hardship. If even a sliver of that discipline could be turned towards the struggle for survival, it would be a victory of sorts. Her younger self, reciting the oath with shining eyes, would have scoffed. The Shaani molded by this damned war. She saw only bitter necessity. Pain? Shaani asked, the question stark. It was a test, a first step down a shadowed path. This human was the enemy, yes, but the oath stubbornly whispered a different title across the gulf between them. Patient. The days blurred into a haze of pain, stolen snatches of sleep, and the constant, sterile hum of the medbay. The translator remained on the cot, a constant temptation whispering of answers I refused to seek. I wasn't stupid. They'd saved me for a reason. Information, a tool to flaunt their mercy to break the others. But each time they changed my dressings, tended my injuries with brusque efficiency, it was harder to cling to hate. Not kindness, I told myself. Just necessity. I was a machine to be repaired, a potential asset. Yet, there were cracks in my certainty. The way they treated their own wounded, no sneers at weakness, only grim determination. Then the glimpses I caught in the shadowed corners of the medbay, thin, frightened faces of children peeking out from piles of tattered blankets. Not young soldiers, but the ones both sides of this war always claimed to protect. Doubt gnawed at me. The enemy I'd been taught to despise was showing a side propaganda never prepared me for. Not monstrous conquerors, but exhausted, and at times, even afraid. One afternoon, movement drew my gaze. The young medic, the one with a flicker of compassion I couldn't fathom. He approached the cot, the bulky translator thrust in his hands. This was it, then. The interrogation, the breaking point before the true horror started. The translator was set before me, its blocky display flickering on. "Why fight?" The words burned, a mockery of the doubts I was battling. My fingers tightened on the rough blanket. "Why?" I hissed back. It was meant as defiance, but exhaustion turned it into something weaker. He recoiled slightly, the translator struggling to capture the despairing edge of my tone. Then another question, slow and hesitant. "Why? Save enemy." The silence stretched. It wasn't the question I expected. Not a demand for loyalty, but confusion echoing my own. The medic blinked, multiple eyes filled not with triumph, but a desperate, baffled sort of hope. And in that moment, I couldn't lie anymore. Not to him, and maybe not even to myself. The young medic, Kaas, his name was, according to the flickering display, didn't leave. He sat on a rickety crate opposite my cot, translator poised between us. Tired eyes searched mine, a silent plea I didn't understand. "They hide children here," I rasped. My voice was barely a whisper, raw from disuse. "Why?" The translator struggled, then spat out a string of stilted words. "Safe. No safe place. War." Kaas fumbled, switching to his own language for a moment, a pleading tone that needed no translation. He looked back at the translator, as if the clumsy device held all the answers he desperately lacked. Frustration flared in me, hot and useless. "Look," I ground out, "I get it. This war, messed up. But you patch me up, hide kids. It doesn't change who I fight for." Duty and hatred were tattered banners now, but all I had left. Kaas jolted, then his many-faceted eyes narrowed in focus. The translator buzzed, rendering his retort, "Fight for..." What? Rocks? Dying? Childish words, born of frustration, yet like an echo of my own doubts. Wasn't that what we were scrabbling over? Barren asteroids no one cared about until they were soaked in blood. More complicated? I started, then faltered. Was it, really? My brother, his shattered leg, the gung-ho slogans on recruitment vids, they all seemed distant, unreal, compared to the stark reality of this med bay. A commotion by the entrance drew our attention. Dr. Shaani, her face taut with worry, was pushing through, bursts of angry shouting in her own tongue trailing behind her. She spotted Kaas, relief warring with disapproval in her eyes. Then, she saw me watching, our gazes locked. I saw the weariness, the unwavering resolve, and something else I'd never seen on the battlefield. Not pity, but a grudging respect. This was more than doctor and patient now. It felt like a silent truce, built on spilled blood and a sliver of understanding neither of us wanted. Dr. Shaani said something curt to Kaas, who scrambled to his feet. As they moved off, she paused. Her harsh voice held a rough edge. "Rest," she ordered, more demand than request. And oddly, amidst the fear and the simmering rage, I felt a flicker of something like hope. I was still their prisoner, still the enemy. But the lines between us were shifting, blurring in ways that scared and intrigued me in equal measure. A jolt ripped me awake, not medics, but the rumble of explosions echoing from outside the medbay. Screams pierced the sterile air. Fear in a dozen languages, none of them human. The flickering light sputtered, then died. Kaas burst in, eyes wide. He fumbled with the translator, his frantic words dissolving into crackling static. Then a different shout, raw and guttural. The Accord forces were under attack. Kaas hesitated, trapped between duty and the room full of the helpless he'd sworn to protect. I understood that hesitation in a visceral way. He looked to me, then thrust the translator into my hands. "Help!" The word was barely decipherable, but his desperate expression needed no translation. My injured leg throbbed in protest, but fury, a different kind this time, sparked through me. The medbay walls wouldn't hold forever. This was my fight too now, even if I didn't fully understand why. I shoved the translator into my tunic. If I was going down, I'd go down spitting defiance at whatever was waiting in the darkness.